Hello, everyone. My name is Fernando Laposse. I'm a Mexican designer, but my studio is in London, so I've been living there for a long time. And now I would like to talk to you about my project, which is called Totomoxtle. And Totomoxtle means corn leaves in the native Nahuatl language of Mexico. So my project is all about corn. So essentially, Totomoxtle is a material which is transformed into a veneer, and it can be glued and flattened and steamed, and then it can be cut using manual techniques and very basic machinery to make objects with applications like marquetry or for surface coverings for walls and panels and things like that. So I use the husks of the native varieties of corn of Mexico, and this is quite an important aspect of the project. So in order to really understand sort of the depth of the project, I need to tell you a little bit about the history of corn. So corn is actually considered the first man-made plant in the world, because the way we know corn nowadays is actually a completely modification from how it grows naturally in nature. So if you look at the image on the left of the screen, that is an image of wild corn, which is called teocintle. And at some point about 9,000 years ago, the first Mesoamericans, the first inhabitants of Mexico, started to realize that they could turn this into powders and flours and then do a lot of cooking with it. So they started to selectively breed it and to transform it, and over 9,000 years, it became what it is today. So this very rich and abundant in grains piece of fruit, which is completely different to most grains and vegetables. And it has been transformed so much into this vegetable with such tightly packed grains that it is now completely dependent on man as well. So if you leave a plant of corn in the wild and let it sit there in the plant, it will just rot away. It needs from the human hand to keep propagating. So there is a complete symbiotic relationship between man and corn, because without the input of man, corn can't subsist. But without the domestication of corn, we wouldn't have had the great civilizations of Mexico and Central America. So throughout this 9,000 years of selective breeding, Mesoamericans created a huge genetic diversity. In fact, corn has the widest genetic diversity of any plant in the world. And this has allowed it to adapt to many of the regions of the world, and this is why now corn is the most planted grain in the world as well. So this is a chart which shows some of the 60+ varieties of corn in Mexico. Each variety has a different color, a different size, a different flavor, and that is, every variety of corn is also has been selectively bred to grow in a particular soil, a particular altitude, a particular region. So this incredible richness of genetic diversity of the plant is completely consequential in the richness and culinary diversity of the country. So if you ever have the chance to go to Mexico, you're going to realize that corn is the star of absolutely every meal, from what we drink to what we eat. And each application has its own corn. So we use blue corns for certain things, we use white corns for certain things, and there's tons and tons of colors. So part of the project, aside from making a sustainable material, also wants to tell the story about the uncertain future of native Mexican corn, and also the uncertain future of the people that are still harvesting with traditional methods. So what I'm showing here is a map of the countries that formed the North American Free Trade Agreement, the now infamous NAFTA. So when Mexico joined the NAFTA in 1994, part of the negotiations to strike a deal was to deregulate all the agricultural laws of Mexico, which were actually quite strict in terms of what chemicals, pesticides, herbicides we could introduce, and also the use of genetically modified seeds. So all of these regulations got lifted in 1994 as a compromise for the trade agreement. And that really changed the way we harvested corn in Mexico a lot, because this put Mexican corn in direct competition with corn from places like the United States and Canada, where corn is harvested drastically differently. And this is because the great majority of the corn harvested in these countries are actually made for making additives, such as sugar, corn syrup for processed foods, ethanol, and for animal feed. And only a very small percentage of corn actually goes for direct human consumption, which is completely different from Mexico. In Mexico, most of the corn gets eaten directly. So this competition between these two different kinds of corn now made the price of corn in Mexico drop by 66% from one year to the next after this agreement. So this meant that the only way for farmers, and especially the poorest farmer, which were still harvesting the national and native varieties, was to find a way to increase their yield by at least 3 times to make the exact same amount of money that they were doing a previous year. So this meant switching to agrochemical techniques, and this economic pressure just got worse and worse also with the arrival of the big supermarket chains in the 90s, which favor standardized color and size in all products. So, so this really forced especially small farmers into using all sorts of additives, pesticides, and especially genetically modified seeds. So to go back to my project, I want to introduce you to my partners. I am working with a small community called Tonawixtla in the southwest of Mexico. They're a very small village of about 400 people, most of them of Mixteco indigenous heritage. And I came in contact with this town because of a lifelong relationship and friendship that I had with this man, Delfino. And this is how I got an in into Tonawixtla. So the story of Tonawixtla is very interesting because it represents this clash of globalization when applied to a very small indigenous community. So what I'm showing right now is a picture that I took in the communal fields of around the town. And you can see a very clear difference between the mountains in the back, where you can see all the green wild trees still growing and flourishing. And then you have all of these bare rocks in the front. And this used to be the area where they were harvesting their native corns 15 years ago. So in only the space of 15 years, their soil has eroded to the point where this is how the soil looks now. Basically, there's no more soil. So the people of Tonawixtla have essentially lost most of their farmable soil and also their seeds, because they have been, because of these economic pressures, encouraged to swap their native seeds for these supposedly improved genetically modified and hybrid seeds. And this problem of erosion that has caused this is a direct result of the mismanagement of all these herbicides and the abandonment of the traditional agricultural methods. So what you see here is an illustration of the traditional methods, which is called the milpa system, which is something that was developed thousands of years ago, where a grain of corn is planted alongside tomato and squash. And remember, corn is a plant that is made by man, so it has an abnormal consumption of nitrogen from the soil. So if you don't plant it along other crops, it just uses the soil up. So this is why the ancient Mexicans found that by combining all of these plants together, it was a way of maintaining the soils fertile. The problem is, with the arrival of herbicides, these toxins basically touch most of the plants that, they kill most of the plants that they touch, except for the seeds that have been modified and designed to withstand those levels of toxicity. So by starting to plant these herbicides, they went from the traditional milpa polyculture into corn monocultures. And that is why the soils have eroded so much. So this is another image of how what their land looks now. And remember, 15 years ago, this was all fertile farmable land. But not everything is lost. Delfino is now the commissioner of the communal lands of Tonahuixtla, so he's a relative position of power. And he's secured a support from the government to start a program for reforestation of this area. And he's doing that only with about 4 other people. And what they've done is they've started to plant a local cactus, which can grow with virtually no soil, and which is acting as anchors for the newly formed topsoil, which is also a product of all the fruits that they produce that fall down to the ground. So with these ecological methods, their land is starting to recover, and it's actually amazing, and I'm super proud of the work they have been doing, because they have managed to completely turn one of the eroded hills into a cactus forest in only about 5 years. So their land is ready for a new harvest and a new plantation of native corn, and this is where I come in. So what I'm trying to do with them is to create a new source of employment by creating a new craft in the area. And this is taking inspiration from the already communitarian spirit that is in the town. So for example, this is images of what they call tortilla ladies, who basically buy corn locally, transform it through a process called nixtamalization, which gets the corn ready to be ground. And they take it to this mill, which is communally owned by the whole town. And the proceeds from the money that they pay to get the corn ground get reinvested into the community. So there's already a microeconomy there where this concept of ownership is very blurred. So, so I want to tap into that. And what I'm interested in doing is, basically, I'm putting funding together to start a series of small workshops where, just the way they share the one machine, which is the mill, they start to share all of these other machines and manufacturing methods to start producing the veneer. The veneer is made from leaves that would otherwise go to waste, and it creates a new source of income, and especially a source of employment during the months where they're waiting for their harvest. So this creates something for them to do while they're not planting, and it creates an extra source of revenue, which is actually many times over what they would make from the grain. So just to give you a perspective of how low the price of corn is now, basically with the harvest that they're expecting now in December, which is going to be about 1.2 tons of grain, they're going to make about 200 euros. So it's just completely unfeasible. If you look at that on an industrial level, it makes sense, but this is because they're using gigantic tractors and they're putting out hundreds of thousands of tons. So this question of being in direct competition with very big producers is what has them at odds. So in a sense, by creating this extra income through the leaves, you are increasing their chances of having economic independence to give them the time to recover. Something that I've just very recently started putting together also is a system where, because right now the most complicated thing is to convince them to start planting native seeds again, because there are complete odds of losing money from doing that. The idea is to pre-sell their harvest. And this can only be done in a super small community. And this is why I'm so interested in working with this town in particular. Because what I'm starting to do right now is create a list of future clients when their harvest comes in December. So by now you must be thinking, well, why does this affect me here in Holland? You know, is this a local problem of Mexico? And the answer is no. This is a diagram that I sourced from National Geographic by John Tomiano. And it shows the loss of diversity in food crops that we've had in the last 80 years. So it is estimated that only in the last 80 years, we've lost about 93% of our variety of crops. So imagine, just to put it in a European context, imagine if all of a sudden you could only make bread from the same wheat that makes Wonder Bread. Why Wonder Bread, you know? And you would lose all of the variety of your breads. It is the equivalent for the Americas and for Africa. There's this loss of diversity of corn. And also, more importantly, an over-reliance on a very small variety of seeds will make us much more vulnerable to diseases in the future, to crop failures, and essentially we could repeat the same mistakes which led to the Irish potato famine. So it is a super important topic, and it's crucial for us to maintain this biodiversity of crops. Thank you very much.